What is good, everybody, man? Hope y'all are having a great Monday night. And we are here with our first mailbag, kicking it off with week 6. And so we'll start off with some questions that were submitted by some of our listeners and everything like that. So we'll get into those conversations. Post y'all's opinions on these topics in the comments. And also at the end of the show, I'm going to have probably 20, 30 minutes to answer any questions that you guys have that maybe you didn't get a chance to submit. And definitely appreciate y'all tuning in. Shout out to T for tuning in. I appreciate you tuning in, T. Always on the stream, man. So let's start out with the SWAC, though. This was submitted on our community page, so shout out to y'all for using that. But the question was, who who has the easiest path and the hardest path to the SWAC? Um, Personally, okay, so I picked two teams for each of these. And for me, I've looked at not only quality of opponent going forward, but also the realistic path to the SWAC championship. So, like a Bethune Cookman who's 0-5 already, a Texas Southern, a Mississippi Valley. I didn't pick any of those teams because really and truly, it doesn't matter who Mississippi Valley or Bethune has on their schedule moving forward because they really don't have a chance at the SWAC championship in all actuality. So I'll start off with my first easiest path, and that we'll start with FAMU. I think Florida A&M has by far, in my opinion, one of the easiest paths to the SWAC championship moving forward right now. I'm looking at their schedule. The only two games I can see them potentially losing on their schedule, they have Alabama A&M next week, and then they have Southern. And that's going to be a tough game for them as well. But for me, when you look at the rest of their schedule with Mississippi Valley, UAPB, who's been atrocious recently, and then also Bethune, who's hasn't won a game this year, and really and truly, outside of the A&M game, hasn't even really been close. I mean, they got blown out by Alabama State, who FAMU just beat 28-0 in Tallahassee. So for me, FAMU by far has the easiest schedule, especially when you look at even Alabama A&M can be had. You look at what they did last week against Grambling. If they lose to Jackson State this week, man, what's the narrative surrounding Alabama A&M if they lose two in a row? That's just that's the biggest question I have. This is a must win almost this week now for Alabama A&M now that they lost that Grambling game, which they weren't supposed to. The hardest, and our guy T already kind of spoiled it for me, but he said UAPB has the toughest, and I absolutely agree with you. I mean, you look at their schedule: Alabama State, Southern, Grambling, Florida A&M, and Alabama A&M. Every single one of those games is losable for UAPB because of just some inconsistency in terms of offensively at the quarterback spot with Skylar Perry. But listen, anytime your quarterback is completing less than 60% of his passes, and then sometimes Skylar Perry's had games in the 40s, it's going to be extremely hard for you to win the game if you're only completing like 40-50% of your passes, especially against the best of the best. And UAP's defense this past week gave up almost 300 yards rushing to Prairie View. And the week before, they let Felix Harper throw for almost 400. And so when you look at the rest of their schedule, you have Ezra Gray in that running game coming in from Alabama State. You have the run game from Southern. You got the Bowden kid from Grambling coming in. Then you have FAMU in that rushing attack and the X-Man at wide receiver. And then you have Akil Glass in that offense coming to town. It's going to be a recipe for disaster in terms of what's coming next for UAPB. And a lot of people think that they can get it turned around. For me, man, it's going to be extremely hard when you look at their schedule. And then the other schedule I think could be very tough. And I want y'all's opinion on this is Southern's. I think Southern's schedule is brutal when you really break down who they have coming up next. I got it right here. They have Prairie View, undefeated, already have 3 SWAC wins. Jawan Pass is playing lights out. That defense is extremely stout. So that's the first game. Then they get Alcorn. Going to be one of their is going to be a division rival till all the divisions, either switch up. Alcorn and Southern is going to be one hell of a game. That's a tough game. Then they have FAMU, which is going to be no pushover. Then they have JSU and Jackson State, which is going to be an extremely tough game. And then they always got that last game against Grambling, which is never going to be a pushover. And after what we saw Grambling do to Akil Glass and Alabama A&M, that game's not a guaranteed win. So you got 5 games just right there that you could possibly lose if you don't bring your A game. So for me, Southern takes the spot as the number 1 schedule, not because of UAPB not really being in position to win the SWAC right now. They're already dropped 2 very important divisional games to Alcorn and Prairie View. So Southern for me would take the number 1 spot there. And then I know in the comments, I believe someone said that this too. Alabama A&M has such an easy path, and I think T called that out too. Alabama A&M absolutely has an easy path. Outside of the Jackson State game this week and the FAMU game next week, they get the streak of Alabama State, who seems to be regressing. Ryan Nettles, I believe, was 3 for 13 this past weekend, which is absolutely atrocious. And then after that, they get Mississippi Valley State. They should win that game. Then on top of that, they get Texas Southern, and then they get UAPB, which has looked atrocious at times this year. So for me, that schedule for Alabama A&M, it looks like a cakewalk after they get past these next 2 weeks. And if they can find a way to win these next 2 games, guys, they're going to be in prime position to escape with that divisional lead, because then they would have a tiebreaker over at Jackson State. They would have a tiebreaker over FAM. And it would be a very tough sell for me to convince me if Alabama A&M wins these next 2 weeks that they won't win the championship. Let me get some of these comments. Felix, we will be talking about FCS football as well. Shout out to Crazy Criminal, man. I appreciate it. Well, that's why I started these mailbags. I felt like we definitely needed more live streams on here. FAMU can beat both if the coaching is good. I completely agree. Drip Bunny, yeah, Maynard. Listen, Maynard is always going to talk his talk, and he's going to be confident in everything he does. So I'm not surprised there. Crazy Criminal, Bethune's coach is sitting on the sun right now. He cannot lose Valley. Listen, Criminal, if Bethune loses to Valley this week, you're talking about they're probably making a move by Monday. I don't know how you go 0-6 with a loss to Valley and you don't lose your job. It would be surprising for me if they gave him till the end of the year if he lost that game to Valley. So for me, I agree. His seat couldn't be any hotter. He might be on the surface of Tucson. He is absolutely in trouble. Maynard, all that talk playing no top schools to get stomped by Grambling, it definitely was not a good look. And yeah, ASU's coach is also on the hot seat. He could probably be going even quicker. Like, I don't even know how he makes it through the entire year, guys, to be completely honest with you. I mean, after what Ely put up this weekend, I believe they had 24 total yards in the first half this past week in Tallahassee against Florida A&M. Not the recipe for success. But moving on here, I want to talk about Coach of the Year. And so this was submitted by two listeners. One was talking about the FBS and one was talking about the FCS and SWAC. So for me, I'm going to cover all three and then get into it. So one, I'll start out with the FCS. It's kind of hard to put the finger on FCS right now just because the favorites have won their games and the people who were pretenders fell. But right now, you have to put North Dakota State. You have to put Sam Houston, James Madison. But the best win of the season thus far, which puts him at the top, is Eastern Washington's coach. He would have to be right now the lead candidate for Coach of the Year, especially after what they did against Montana this weekend on ESPN2. They got flexed into a primetime main ESPN channel, and Eastern Washington pulls off the huge win. That Montana defense was only giving up like 7 points a game, and Eastern Washington found a way to do it. Eric Barrier put on another performance. He did have 2 picks, but when it came down to it, Eric Barrier went out there and made plays. So I like Eastern Washington right now for FCS in terms of Coach of the Year. For the SWAC, it's very hard, but is I guess biased, as unbiased, uh, as unbiased as I can be. I think you got to give it right this second to to Dion. I mean, really and truly, because right now you really can't make an argument. I would say Dion and or Prairie View's head coach. Those are the two that I think would have the best argument. One, Prairie View has to win out. They have to win that division, and if they win the division, you got to give it to them. But if Dion comes out of the East, I think just based on the hype and the all the clout he has coming behind him, Dion would win it. But right now, the top two have to be Prairie View's head coach and have to be Deion Sanders for Jackson State. And then for the FBS, I think there are so many good candidates. I think you could look at Sam Pittman at Arkansas. I think you could look at BYU. I think you could look at Kirk Ferentz at Iowa. Luke Fickell, if he makes the playoff, is a shoe-in. So all those coaches have a great argument, but if I had to pick one right now, is I know it's coming off a very bad loss last weekend. Personally, I would give it to Sam Pittman if I had to give it to someone right now. I know they just lost 37-0 against Georgia, but like I said on my instant reaction episode, I don't think there's anyone in the country who is going to beat Georgia in Sanford Stadium in Athens this past Saturday playing the way they are playing. Backup quarterback or not, that team is a great running team. The offensive line is stout. The defense is the best in the country, giving up 4 points per game. But when you look at what Sam Pittman did, Arkansas was by far right above Vandy in terms of pure talent, top to bottom. And in less than a season, and I want y'all to put this, I want to put this in perspective for y'all, with a COVID season, not even a full season and not even a full year to go on the road and recruit, Sam Pittman took that like 3-9, 2-10 Arkansas team to number 8 in the country, and they're still top 15 right now. And if they win at Ole Miss this weekend, that is going to be a top 10 team again. And I don't think people are wrapping their heads around how good this Arkansas team is. And I said it on the instant reactions. I think last weekend was more of a statement of how good Georgia is rather than how bad Arkansas is or how overrated they were, because Georgia's just that good. When you look at the recruiting classes, there was no way Arkansas was going to go in there and beat them by any sort of significant amount, anything like that. So for me, I think you have to give it right now to Sam Pittman. I would probably put Luke Fickell second, just in my opinion. And then also, I really like this one. The sleeper coach of the year, Pittman at Arkansas, Stoops at UK. Crazy Criminal, if he goes on and wins the SEC by chance and or pulls off an upset against Georgia or something like that, I don't think you could deny Stoops. This is the second time in, I believe, 5 years that he's had Kentucky on the verge of a top 10 ranking. He had them all the way up at like number 7 just a few years back. You have to give Stoops some credit, because Kentucky is not an easy place to coach, not an easy place to recruit, and not an easy place to win, especially in the SEC. I'm absolutely impressed. I'm glad you mentioned Stoops. I totally forgot about him. T said coaching is huge, bigger than getting the top recruits. SWAC fans don't get that. Georgia has monsters from T, and T said Eric Barrier is different. Glass and Barrier are extremely different. I agree. So those are my coach of the year, I guess, picks right now as we get into week 6. Now, this next question, I know a lot of people, I had a few people text me actually about like, what does this question even mean? So bad wins versus quality losses. This was submitted by our guy, Coach Simmons. Awesome YouTube channel, man. Make sure to go subscribe to him. I love that guy, and I love what he's doing over there. But he asked me why a team like Weber State was ranked being 1-3. They're 2-3 now. They won this past weekend. Why they were ranked over an Alabama A&M, a Jackson State, someone like that. And it boiled down to the question about, is losing to top teams more important than beating teams you should beat? because the argument that was presented against Jackson State, Alabama A&M, and these other SWAC teams are that their out of conference scheduling is not as good as some of these other conferences. And when you look at Weber State's 2 losses, they're both the top 7 teams in the FCS. That, and they also lost to an FBS team. So their losses are they lost to Utah week 1, who was a top 25 team at the time, 40-17, beat Dixie State. They lost to James Madison. They I believe it's UC Davis was the other team. They lost by 3 points, and that's the number 7 team in the country. And then they beat Cal Poly this weekend to get to 2-3. And still on their schedule, they still have to go play at Eastern Washington on the red turf, which was what we saw this weekend, is a whole ordeal. So for me, that boiled down to the philosophical football question: is it better to have quality losses, or is it better to have cupcake or AKA bad wins on your resume? And I'm gonna expand this out to both Power 5, FCS, everything like that, because you could say the same thing about an Arkansas this past weekend. Should they be ranked above a Michigan or Michigan State, who really doesn't have any top 25 wins? Should that count less than Arkansas or Ole Miss losing to a Georgia or an Alabama? AKA, or also, I guess you can also go to Ohio State losing to an Oregon, who was a top 10 team. Is that loss better than, a Cincinnati beating a Murray State that week? Is that enough to get Cincinnati to jump them? So I'm gonna try to answer this the best I can. I really want y'all to comment below your thoughts on this. They almost beat VMI. Weber State would embarrass Alabama A&M. That's a tough schedule. A&M can't compare to Weber. I agree to a point. So the way I'll put it is yes, we still have to value wins. So even though Weber lost to 2 really good teams, you still got to drop them, which they were. But at the same time, I'm not taking a win over Delta State for a Jackson State and saying that they deserve to be ranked ahead of a Weber State who lost to a James Madison. For me, that going and playing a James Madison is more impressive than scheduling a D2 team and only winning by 7 points. And that's where the fundamental issue of scheduling in the SWAC becomes an issue, because you want to say, oh, we're undefeated. Our 1 loss is to ULM, who's a Power 5 team. We should be ranked over some of these teams with 2-3 losses. And it's like, but on the other hand, they're losing to top 10 FCS teams, and you got a 1-point win over FAMU, who doesn't even have votes in the top 25 poll. You have a 7-point win over a Division II school, and then you beat Tennessee State, who, given now, I want to say congratulations to Tennessee State on their upset win over Austin Peay. Super impressive. But right now, Tennessee State is your biggest and most impressive win to this point. So for me, I don't think you could possibly make an argument for Jackson State or SWAC or any of these SWAC undefeateds to be ranked over Weber State just based on strength of schedule right now, because you have to ask yourself the question: would a Jackson State or Alabama A&M go and beat James Madison? Would they go and, let's just take that whole conference. Would any team in the SWAC right now, Prairie View and Jackson State are the 2 undefeateds right now, so we'll take them. Would either of those teams go on the road and beat a James Madison, beat a UC Davis, beat a Eastern Washington, and or beat a North Dakota State or a Portland State or someone like that? That's the question, and that is why I have been so hard on the SWAC fans for not wanting to play out-of-conference games, because if you want to be ranked, you have to play ranked teams. And what happens is no one wants to make a comparison to the Power 5, but at the same time, you look at some of these undefeated teams. I want to take the Group of 5 race right now. So a Coastal Carolina and a BYU. They're both undefeated, but BYU has surpassed Coastal Carolina, even though Coastal Carolina was ranked higher to start the season. And it's because Coastal Carolina has not played a team with a winning record yet. And then you got a BYU team who went out and scheduled 3 Pac-12 games to start the season and won them all and won a majority of them fairly convincingly. So for me, BYU has done enough to jump Coastal Carolina. And it's the same reason a one-loss Ohio State is ranked above an undefeated Michigan and an undefeated Michigan State, because Michigan State and Michigan haven't beat anyone. And on top of that, the one loss for Ohio State was to a top 10 Oregon squad who was number 3 until this weekend when they choked away that Stanford game, even though, in my opinion, it kind of got stolen from them. So for me, I would rather have one or two quality losses than a bunch of bad wins and or cupcake wins. And that comes into the whole mindset of myself. And T and Crazy Criminal have tuned into the show enough to know that's how I feel. That's how I feel about non-conference scheduling. If you don't go challenge yourself in the non-conference, then it really takes away your argument on why you deserve to be ranked over this team, why you deserve to be ranked over that team, and why you deserve respect in the first place. You can't just go play conference games and expect everyone to drop everything and think you're, on top of the world. And that brings me to Alabama A&M schedule. That schedule has been atrocious. They didn't play a single D1, a single FBS team, and didn't play a single game against anybody in the FC. I mean, the only team they played was South Carolina State week 1. That was by far their hardest non-conference game, and then they played Tuskegee, D2 team. Alabama A&M had zero argument to be in the top 25, and now that they lost the toughest, one of the toughest games they played in Grambling, now they definitely don't have an argument. They have to schedule better and better teams, and that's why I give. So I don't know if you guys noticed this. Fresno State, even after suffering a loss, stayed in the top 25 just a bit because their losses were to an Oregon. Then they upset UCLA. Then they struggle with UNLV. Scheduling those tough games gave them an argument because the committee, the voters, and I think anyone who watches college football it concedes the fact that a good loss is better than a bad win. And I think it's even in the FCS top 25. I won't mention who won the game because I know T didn't watch it and he was telling me they didn't watch it. So I won't spoil who won the game, but the team who lost the Eastern Washington Michigan game they didn't drop in the standings as much because of that huge win. So you have a North Dakota sitting at 13 right now with 2 losses, but their 2 losses are to 2 great teams. So quality losses do, in the long run, outweigh bad wins because beating up on D2 teams, or if you're in a Power 5 conference, beating up on FCS teams does not give you a strong case for anything in terms of rankings and or respect in the national perspective. Crazy Criminal said Oregon had a bad loss against Stanford, but playing Stony Brook earlier and Fresno losing to Hawaii will not help them. I completely agree, Crazy Criminal. That's a terrible look for Oregon right now. I mean, the only thing I'll disagree with you with, Crazy Criminal, is if Ohio State can win out, Oregon's going to be sitting very pretty because the committee's going to look at that Oregon loss or look at that Oregon win over Ohio State on the road and say, man, well, they're the only team who could go into Columbus and beat Ohio State. So that's what's going to help them, in my opinion, is Oregon has that win over Ohio State to, put on their resume, to say the least. Yeah. So T said beating the Delta Devils or Miles College is not going to get you ranked. And that brings me to another thing is I want to know how you guys feel about it. I still think there needs to be some oversight on non-conference, and especially in the Power 5. The Power 5, you should absolutely have some sort of scheduling mandate to allow teams, I guess, a fairer schedule. And I've been so vocal on this show that teams need to go out and they need to take a page out of college basketball's book and have conference challenges. And I know Coach Simmons has said this. I know some other channels have too. Why not have the Big Ten SEC Challenge in football and have the 2 number 1 teams from the previous year play? Have the 2 number 2 teams play? Have the 2 number 3 teams play, and so on and so forth. And that way you get 1, equal matchups, and 2, you can generate a bunch of revenue for your conference and school. And also, why would you not want the exposure that, I mean, so y'all can just tell me in the comments, how many of y'all would be pumped if you got to see an Ohio State Alabama game week 1 or 2, and or a Michigan Florida game week 4, and Auburn an Auburn Michigan and an Auburn Minnesota game week 3 or 4? It would bring in so much revenue and attention, and people would be talking about it, and it would give the conferences bragging rights outside of bowl season, because we see so many times that the argument for who won bowl season is skewed because of opt-outs, because of injuries. Why not put these games at the beginning of the season, and then we can really start forming who's the best conference? And this goes for any conferences, not just the Big Ten and the SEC. Why not the Pac-12 versus ACC challenge? You got a Clemson. Who would not like to see Clemson versus Oregon week 1? A Florida State versus Stanford, an Arizona State versus whoever, Florida State. I mean, you would have so many great games to put on your schedule and bring in TV revenue, bring in attendance, everything. It would work. And that's what I want to see also shift down to the FCS conferences. And that's what I've screamed about with the SWAC, is you have 3 or 4 conferences that are in your geographical footprint, and you just won't schedule them. I stand by the case that there is never a year that Alabama State and Alabama A&M should not, one of the two should not be playing Jacksonville State and Sanford. Those should be absolutely the two, that should be the first 2 calls you make in every all season to get a game scheduled. Those are your in-state FCS competition, and you don't play them yearly. Rotate it. Alabama State play Jacksonville State 1 year. Alabama A&M play Sanford 1 year, and rotate it out like that. There is no reason you should not be playing each other. So, McNeese has done a great job of playing a lot of these SWAC teams as well. They played Alcorn. They played Southern this year. They've done a nice job. But with the ASUN, with the Southland, you could put any conference down there. Yeah, Kennesaw State's down there. Why wouldn't the SWAC reach out and try to do some sort of conference challenge like that? One, it would stop sending your worst teams to go play these teams and get absolutely demolished year in and year out. And a game that I would like to see happen, how great would it be to test Prairie View, who's undefeated, leading your conference right now? Wouldn't it be great to go see Prairie View play Sam Houston State? They are in the same state, and I don't even know if they've ever played. Off the top of my head, I doubt it they have. Why is Prairie View and them not playing in-state Texas schools? There are so many good ones to pick from. And I understand the argument of, we don't want to go play North Dakota State because, that's so much money and travel and all this. I'm not asking you to do that. One, I don't think many people in the SWAC are on North Dakota State's level. And 2, that is a long travel, and I understand. But on the flip side, why not schedule those down south teams in your region? Even the Citadel's not that far. You have so many places that you can go schedule games. So for me, the bad win versus quality losses debate would be solved if there was some sort of oversight on how many out-of-conference games were scheduled and what quality they had to be. And I understand there's some historical aspect where you got to place, a Tuskegee and Alabama A&M are going to play a Miles and Alabama State. All that, I get it. But at the same time, there's no reason you should be avoiding those marquee matchups in terms of your out-of-conference schedule, especially if your goal is to become relevant and become part of this FCS, powerhouse conference that you want to have, because you can't become that if you don't beat anybody. Because like T and Crazy Criminal have said, and everyone in the comments, beating Delta State does not make you an FCS powerhouse. So personally, I would love to see that keep evolving. Crazy Criminal said, I think we could get those great non-conference matchups during the 3 conference alliance. I agree. And, Crazy Criminal, I've really thought about this. It's so weird. So they signed this conference alliance up, but then LSU and I believe USC signed a matchup. So it's like it didn't even really help the Pac-12 and all these teams sign a non-conference schedule. But I agree, because with the alliance, my whole thing was it's great because, one, it's all the two of the 3 conferences in that agreement or alliance have scheduling issues. So personally, I would like to see them beef up their schedule by kind of playing each other. A Pac-12 versus ACC non-conference schedule would be huge because it would stop that argument that it's like a one, I guess a one-horse race in those conferences. He also said Texas Southern did play Baylor and Grambling played Houston. Alcorn got a good win versus Northwestern State. I agree. Those were those were really good wins. Not wins. That was a good win for Alcorn, but those also were pretty good games. The thing I would like to see though, guys, and I know that I've been vocal on this is, and Coach Simmons, shout out to him for this. I still think the SWAC should try to schedule as many Sun Belt teams as possible. You look at all the Sun Belt teams that are in your region and also CUSA teams, the Southern Misses, the UABs. I mean, you have so many teams you can go out and schedule and try to get some of these games in. You have to start playing some upper teams. I know Jackson State went and scheduled Texas State and ULM again, but I mean, branch out and play as many Sun Belt teams as you can moving forward because that's going to be your number one, I guess, driving factor into growing the SWAC's brand, especially in the South. Because one, it gets your teams in front of more eyes, and also it can increase your brand because you're going to come into Grambling is going to come into town and play like, let's say, Coastal Carolina. All those people in Coastal Carolina are going to be like, oh man, who is this? I'm gonna look it up. I'm gonna find the history. I'm gonna find a player I like, everything like that. They're gonna watch shows like mine, All Script, Cut Day, everything, and be like, okay, so this is what Grambling is about, and then they know it, and it's gonna eventually come back up. So that's why I like going to play non-conference games. I agree. They can at least fit one non-conference game in every season against top FCS talent. Michael Head said, "Go A&M Bulldogs bounce back Saturday against JSU." Michael, I will be there in Huntsville for that game. I am pumped to see it. T said, "Glass didn't look like an NFL QB." Listen, that was one of his worst games, but I would expect that Glass does not throw another 4 interceptions this year. I'd be shocked. Alcorn took South Alabama to the wire. I agree. And Crazy Criminal, I thought they had a chance to really win that game. The South Alabamas, the Louisiana Monroes, those games, and really even the Texas States, those are games that the FCS can have. And I know a lot of people on this show watch other FCS football other than the SWAC. There's a lot of teams out there that can compete and beat these FBS teams. You look at what South Dakota State did against Colorado State, beating them by like 20 something points. And then you got Montana beating a top 20 Pac-12 team in Washington. Then you got Eastern Washington beating UNLV. You had so many upsets of huge magnitude. Jacksonville State beating Florida State. There's so many opportunities to make a statement here and there that's why I would like to see more steps being taken to schedule these winnable games because I understand the money games. I get it. But at the same time, the odds of an Alabama State beating an Auburn, a FAMU beating a North Carolina team next year is like -10. But when you schedule a South Alabama, you schedule a Texas State, you schedule a ULM, you schedule a UAB, the chances of you winning are greatly increased and going to play some of these Power 5 teams. Yes, South Dakota beat Colorado. So for me, it's the rest of the FCS has laid the blueprint out for the SWAC. And for me, they just have to find a way to follow it. So that's kind of where I am on bad wins, quality losses. I would rather have some quality losses than a bunch of bad wins and not play anybody. And the history of college football backs everyone up on that because all those teams that scheduled cupcake games, once it got down to crunch time and key games for a national championship, for a playoff win, anything like that, they lost. And so having tougher schedules prepares your teams to go win championships. So I think a quality loss is more important to a team than a bad win over a team that you should beat 9 times out of 10. But last topic here, guys, before I'll let y'all just kind of run ideas by me for a few minutes. But which coaches are on the hottest seats? We've already mentioned 2. Ely at Alabama State and Bethune-Cookman's head coach are absolutely on the face of the sun right now in terms of hot seats. We've already seen USC fire their head coach, and they're looking for a new one right now. And guys, I think this is an obvious first answer one right here. Coach Ed Orgeron is absolutely on fire right now after what happened to LSU against Auburn, where they allowed a 13-point comeback and they made Bo Nix turn into Johnny Football, a reincarnation of Johnny Manziel, man. He was all over the field. Auburn storms back for a 24-19 win. And now you're looking at LSU like, man, what is missing from that 2019 team? Joe Burrow's not walking back through that door, and Orgeron's already faced some criticism off the field. You have to be thinking that if they don't find a way to turn it around, he's got to be on his way out. And LSU already has 2 losses, and they still have to play Florida. They still have to play Alabama. They still have to play Arkansas. They still have to play Ole Miss. So for me, I think Ed Orgeron is the number 1 FBS coach on the hot seat. And I knew my guy was coming in here, Mike Norvell at Florida State. So everything I've heard, though, Crazy Criminal, is that Travis Hunter is saving his job right now. That's the latest thing I heard from a guy who I trust pretty well on Florida State football, is that he is being saved by Travis Hunter. If Travis Hunter decommits or Travis Hunter doesn't end up signing or something like that, Norvell could be absolutely out the door. But for me, I think he deserves to be on the hot seat. I just don't know if, one, they can afford to fire him, because I believe they're still paying on Taggart's contract. And 2, man, when you have the recruiting class that Norvell has put together, you cannot risk firing him and losing that commitment, especially of Travis Hunter, because that guy is a generational type talent in terms of what he's bringing to Florida State. And yeah, I know he broke his leg, and I'm really hoping he recovers from that, because that kid has, like I said, generational talent. Prayers to him, man. Hopefully he recovers. Gary Patterson at TCU is interesting. I would say no, just because I feel like they're going to pull off an upset here or there somewhere. And for me, I like what you said at the end, is like, where does TCU go after Gary Patterson and all he accomplished? Because I don't think you're going to find anyone, at least immediately or anytime soon, that can replicate what he's done over his time at TCU. So Gary Patterson's like one of those where it's going to depend on how he finishes out the season, in my opinion. If he can get to 7-8 wins, they'll probably keep him just because of his name. And also, I don't see a direct upward trajectory, because when you look at it, so the way teams are looking at it now is, 1, the USC job's open. 2, the next job to probably be open is LSU. Florida State could be open. So when you're looking at it in the pecking order, you're probably not even going to get a top 5 coach, depending on, who else fires their coach, because LSU and USC are way better jobs, and they're going to land their guys first before you really get a chance to land yours. So that's why I think TCU is probably going to stand pat this cycle, because there's going to be too many blue blood jobs opening across the country. Florida State's recruiting has been building last 2 years. LSU's recruiting has taken a hit, not deep in backups. Yeah, that's been one of their biggest problems. They almost beat Notre Dame. You see, Notre Dame is such a weird team for me, because they look so impressive against Wisconsin, who I guess you could say now it was pretty overrated to start the season. But then they lose to Jacksonville State. They almost beat Notre Dame. So what I think happened, and you see this happen in college football sometimes, is the emotional toll of that loss to Notre Dame, where they thought they had it won, really set that momentum off in a very negative direction, and they never were really able to recover from that loss. Because personally, I think if Florida State wins that Notre Dame game off that field goal, they actually probably beat Jacksonville State. They probably don't lose to Louisville. They probably are more competitive against Wake Forest. So for me, it was just that momentum built up so much from a heartbreaking loss like that it just absolutely sent their season into a spiral. And so that Notre Dame loss might have been the single most important loss in Mike Norvell's career, because it set off just a chain reaction of events that he really didn't have any control of. And so So this isn't a head coach. This is just an assistant. I think you got to put Tony Elliott possibly on the hot seat as well for Clemson after what they have failed to do this season. I mean, he's been one of the hottest assistants in the country, but ever since I believe it was Jeff Scott took that USF job, they just haven't been the same on offense. And so for me, Tony Elliott's probably getting the side eye right now because Clemson fans, if they lose one or two more games, they're going to be looking for a fall guy. With how bad the offense has performed, I think Tony Elliott could be getting close to the hot seat. He's probably not on it just yet, but that's someone to watch out for down the stretch. Crazy Criminal said we have to suck it up and keep the coach in at least 3 years to get established with recruiting, game plans, assistant coaches, etc. I agree, and that's why I don't think I'd be shocked if they moved off Norvell right this second just because of the recruiting. Because if he can land Hunter, I know they got that. I forget his name. They got a very talented quarterback in that class. They have a lot of pieces in that class that can develop down the line. And so, at least when you're Florida State, you're like, okay, if we give him 1 to 2 more years, see what he can do. If we're still in the same place, we can always fire him then. The buyout will be less, and we'll have these players on campus. So, I think Florida State right now is looking long term because I think we can all agree here, even though they fired Taggart very quickly, it was a needed move. And Taggart was taking that program down very, very fast. I mean, Taggart absolutely destroyed the foundation, any foundation that was left over from the Jimbo Fisher, Bobby Bowden years. And so for me, I think they have to let Norvell at least lay the groundwork, the foundation for if he's not the guy, you can move on. But at least when the new coach comes in, he's not building up from zero the same way Norvell had to. And then also, you got to look at what a rough start Norvell had about the accusations about lying, about texting the players in during the BLM protest and everything like that. He got off to a rough start. I know it's tough on the field right now, but when you look at what he's building, at least there's going to be a foundation for the next coach. And so I think they might, I think they'll at least give him one more year. If he can get to a bowl game next year, they'll probably give him a second year. But then past that, he's going to have to compete for the ACC. And I don't know about you guys, that's going to be a tall task. But right now, outside of UNC and Clemson, I don't think there's a clear number 3 team in the ACC that you're like, man, clear number 3. They're going to be competing with Clemson and UNC. I mean, maybe Virginia Tech, but Justin Fuente's been on the hot seat before this year as well, and they can't seem to keep it consistent. Boston College has their moments. Wake Forest is interesting this year, but I don't know if Clawson could put together multiple classes to sustain the success that we've seen this year. T said Florida's a hard state to recruit with all the FBS teams. I agree there. And a lot of schools recruiting out of Florida. Yeah, I mean, you look at every single SEC school has probably 10 to 20 kids from Florida. I mean, it's that deep. And when you look at, we look at these Florida kids, there's also a lot of programs that recruit locally in high school. So you have like an IMG Academy type place where they just have the best collection of talent from around the country, and it only adds to the mystique of those high school recruits down in Florida. So for me, it's great to be in Florida if you're a Florida team because you get almost, it used to be you get first dibs, but now with the national expansion of recruiting, I think you're seeing a different story. And then on top of that, for another team that potentially could move on from their coach, and it's a long shot. I'm talking about an extremely, extremely long shot. It's Jimmy Lake at Washington. For me, he's got to be on the hot seat, even though he's newer in his tenure. He's taken over a legend in Chris Peterson. A loss to Montana, a recent loss to Oregon State has not set well with Washington fans, with Washington boosters. And that team is a team that a lot of people wants to compete for a Pac-12 title. They got the 5-star quarterback sitting on the bench right now who is a legacy quarterback because his dad was huge up there. So for me, I think Jimmy Lake right now is probably looking at a very hot seat because you cannot lose to Montana if you're a top 20 team in the country in Washington. So that would be another one I watch very closely if they falter down the stretch because they still have to play Oregon. They still have to play Utah. They have some very, very good teams on their schedule. And yeah, crazy coming to Washington, Colorado, Utah are all struggling. I could see Colorado getting a break there because Colorado's coach is fairly new. I think I think he's only in his second year, and that's Dorrell at Colorado. Washington, I agree with. Utah, it's so weird because I don't think Utah is an easy place to coach. So I think they're in the same boat as TCU where they had a really good year last year. They had two deaths in the program where two kids died very tragically within the program. So I think for me, they're going to look at that and be like, man, look at all the turmoil he's had to face. I think they keep him at least another year at Utah. But Washington is one I can see absolutely getting out of hand. And yeah, they had a lot of they had a lot of adversity. I mean, when you look at Ty Jordan last year, when you look at what went on this early this season, I mean, that program has been through so much, man. So for them, I think it's just a lot. It's a lack of focus on the field right now, which is completely understandable. So I wouldn't imagine any wholesale changes at Utah. They also whiffed on their quarterback transfer in Charlie Brewer. He ended up transferring out after losing the starting job. So for me, it was a whiff on a transfer, adversity off the field. So for me, I think they're going to give just a little bit of lenience on that. And T, I agree. These FCS teams are making a statement, and I do want to address that because I don't think people have analyzed it enough on these shows. And we got about 10 minutes left, but I don't think people understood what the COVID extra year and the free transfer did for the FCS. And I think people are kind of overlooking how much it helped these FCS coaches recruit because you had kids transferring who might not necessarily transfer in other years, and it also allowed a lot of these teams to keep their teams from the spring, which means you had a decreased amount of turnover, while the top teams in the Power Five still had a lot of turnover because their kids were going to the NFL. And so what it did was almost for 1 year completely smushed it almost evaporated the talent gap that we're used to seeing from the FCS to the FBS level. And so for me, this year was so unique because of the transfer portal, because of the 1 year extra of eligibility everyone got. It really helped the lower group of 5 teams. It helped the FCS teams, and it absolutely helped anybody who believes in the transfer portal. And I think that's what you're seeing. You look at what Jackson State did, signing the top class in FCS history. You look at North Dakota State landing Quincy Patterson. You look at all these FCS teams landing these high-level transfers, and it's all over the country, from the SWAC to the CAA to the Missouri Valley to the Big Sky to the Big South. Everyone landed a bunch of recruits, and a lot of them panned out very well for a lot of these teams, and now they're starters and stars on that team. The FCS is getting a lot of exposure and should get a lot of recruits. Listen, T, I know you didn't watch it, but that Eastern Washington Montana game absolutely lived up to the hype. It was I'm not going to tell you who won, so you ain't got to mute me, but it put FCS football completely on the map. And for me, I watched, I record a lot of games and go back and rewatch them. I watched probably 10, 20 games this weekend. That game was arguably a top 5 game of the weekend. I mean, it was back and forth. It had great plays, great players, NFL prospects. That game for me really proved that FCS football is here to stay. And that's why I've kind of shifted to covering more of it, interviewing some of the players, is because that I think for me, FCS football is going to become a mainstay. And I think as we see more and more of these top prospects transfer due to, you don't have to sit out anymore, you're going to see a lot more prospects try to go get some playing time immediately, try to go somewhere where, you can make an impact immediately. And also, for me, as much as North Dakota State has dominated the FCS over the past few years, I think there's more parity at the top of FCS right now than there's really been in a long time, between James Madison, between Eastern Washington, between Montana, between South Dakota State, between whoever you want to put up there. There are so many programs up there that really have a national title winning squad right now. And so for me, I am so excited to see what happens in the playoffs. I think the viewership and attendance for the FCS playoffs this year is going to be at an all-time high, and I am extremely excited to see who comes away. I just think right now I'll kind of give y'all my thoughts on this before we head out of here, I still think right now it's going to be very tough to beat North Dakota State in the playoffs, man. I think Quincy Patterson is playing absolutely lights out. That defense is stout. Their offensive line is always controlling the line of scrimmage. They have a solid run game. Right now, is for me, it's going to be very hard to beat North Dakota State. As good as Sam Houston is, as James Madison is, I just think North Dakota State this year actually can reclaim their throne. And also, I believe Sam Houston State lost Ezra, the wide receiver, who was an All-American last season. So that's a huge loss for them. But for me, I think I really, and I know this is kind of a controversial pick because people don't believe they can win anything. I still believe Eastern. I believe in Eric Berry and Eastern Washington. They can make some noise late. I believe Montana can. I think the parity. I think there's probably 4 to 7 teams that realistically, if they get hot in the playoffs, can go and make a run for the FCS title this year. T said FCS may have at least 20 players drafted. I agree with that. I think there's a lot of Power 5 transfers that have made an impact. Yeah, T, I believe they have. I'll have to double check myself after the live stream, but I believe they did lose Ezard. I don't know for how long, but he's a stud. I'm hoping he's not out for long. If he is, Crazy Criminal said no one's talking about Nevada, UTSA, SMU, and San Diego State. Dude, Nevada looked really good. They put it on Boise State this past weekend. I actually picked Boise State in one of my pick'em leagues I'm in, and they absolutely embarrassed Boise State this past weekend. And that kid Carson Strong at quarterback is probably going to be a top 10, top 15, maybe even top 20 pick. He looks legit, and so for me, Nevada is absolutely playing lights out football. SMU just has a ridiculous offense. That quarterback Tanner Mordecai out of Oklahoma, he was supposed to be the next big thing after Jalen Hurts before they landed Spencer Rattler and Caleb Williams. So Tanner Mordecai is no joke at quarterback for SMU, and they are just putting up points at a alarming rate. I haven't got to check out a lot of UTSA or San Diego State, so I'll probably kind of look at that. I'll honestly probably look at that after this live stream. EWU's offense is ridiculous, man. And in the playoffs, you can be so good at every position, but it really comes down, do you have a quarterback who can lead, and do you have a game-winning, game-changing quarterback as your offense? And right now, Eric Berrier is hands down the best quarterback in the country. So in the FCS. So for me, that's why I got to put them up there. Then also you got Quincy Patterson at North Dakota State. And also shout out to Chris Ola Duncan, who transferred to South Dakota State. They're playing lights out as well. So there's going to be a huge, huge quarterback battle going into the FCS playoffs. Howard. If they would have landed Ezard, man, that would have been a game changer for them, because that kid is arguably the best wide receiver in the country. But guys, I appreciate y'all tuning in to the first mailbag. Let's see right here. UTSA beat Illinois, UNLV, and Memphis so far. I forgot they beat Memphis. That is a huge win, because I saw that on SportsCenter the other night. So yeah, that's a big win. And UTSA, man, listen, it's been a long time coming for them. They had a long road moving into FBS. So to see them finally get that program kind of trending in the right direction is huge. UNLV, man, talk about a disappointment, losing to Eastern Washington, losing to UTSA. It's not a great thing, but the Dakota School linemen are so big. I agree. But man, I appreciate y'all tuning into the first mailbag. We're going to be so this will move to Tuesday next week. I just have a roundtable for the Alabama A&M and Jackson State game on All Scripts channel tomorrow at I believe 5:30 p.m. Central Time. So make sure to go check that out. But mailbags will be every Tuesday night, 6:30 p.m. Central Time, live right here on YouTube. Go to our community page or message us on social media to submit questions, to submit topics. We will talk about anything and everything. It could be any level of college football. Any question topic you want to do, we will do it here. Just make sure to submit it on our community tab. I will post the link tomorrow to submit questions for next week's show, and we'll just collect them all, and we'll do a big show. If we have to go over an hour, we absolutely can. Man, I appreciate it, T. I'll add that question to our next live stream, man. So FCS players most likely to get drafted. I'll come with my top 5 FCS players to get drafted next week. I'll talk to Script, man. I got to talk to him later tonight about the round table. So I'll tell him to unblock you. I got you. You just got to chill on the SWAC hate. Got to chill on the SWAC hate just a little bit, and I think he'll be cool with it. But I appreciate all y'all for tuning in. Shout out to Crazy Criminal T for interacting all night, man. I appreciate y'all so much. But for right now, guys, the Blue Bloods are out.